He was probably an inmate at a penitentiary, and let's not forget, they have a lot of time to kill.
His identity was completely hidden, and we aren't talking about some random beanie grabbed on the way out. He wore a specialized tactical hood, meant to conceal absolutely every feature. Not a single strand on his head was visible. Specialized combat gear hid his fingers, ensuring forensics wouldn't find any prints, threads, or genetic material. He also sported a hooded sweatshirt pulled tight under a heavy coat. Slung over his shoulder was a store-branded brand knapsack from Walmart. Literally the most generic, untraceable piece of luggage, available stateside. A weapon sat snug in a carefully placed rig on his hip. He came armed, and he was hyper-aware of the security lens watching him. There was zero hesitation or sneaking around as he approached. An ex-federal investigator even called his walk a casual stroll, acting totally at home. Stretching his arm up, he blocked the view. The man believed his plan was absolutely flawless, but he completely forgot about his lower arm. On February 10th, 2026, exactly 9 days following Nancy Guthrie's vanishing, feds dropped the security video from the evening. She was snatched. Nobody was meant to ever see those frames. The victim's porch cam mysteriously shut down at 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, deliberately killed by the intruder. Any activity captured during that blackout window appeared completely wiped from existence. Federal authorities teamed up with the tech giant behind the device, managing to extract hidden clips buried deep inside their cloud architecture. That rescued evidence blew the whole case wide open. The recording displays a disguised figure walking right up to the woman's entryway, fully geared up in a tactical mask, heavy coat, and hand protection. The armed suspect also has a bag slung across his back. The intruder then lifts his arm to blind the sensor. He starts by using his protected fingers, followed by a biological material that detectives eventually sent off for intensive lab testing. Authorities officially labeled the man on tape as the prime target in this abduction, detailing him as a guy standing around 5'9" to 5'10" tall. He's got a standard frame, favors his right side, and inadvertently brought along the greatest clue a detective could ask for: a deeply personal piece of body art permanently etched onto his lower arm. It didn't slip past a seasoned federal behavior analyst who caught the detail. This veteran investigator spent his entire career cracking some of the most twisted and baffling mysteries across the nation. The second that porch video went public on February 10th, the expert broke down the tape and shared his professional breakdown with a major national media outlet. Making an appearance on a primetime crime show, he dropped a massive bombshell that changes everything. He firmly stated his conviction that a distinct ink mark is visible right above the suspect's dominant hand. Leaving that kind of trail is a massive screw-up for anyone trying to stay off the radar. As the expert explained to reporters, it basically proves we aren't dealing with a seasoned pro. Let that sink in for a second. We are talking about an assailant who meticulously masked every inch of his body, struck under the cover of night, and deliberately disabled the home security. He purposefully picked out a generic sack, boring outerwear, and a stealthy weapon rig, looking like he planned every single detail to absolute perfection. Despite all that careful plotting, a top-tier federal behavioral expert took one glance at the recording and immediately declared the guy an amateur. The mask didn't cover everything. Parts of his brow, lashes, and facial hair were totally visible. Any of those follicles could have easily dropped at the scene. A true expert in the criminal underworld knows that hiding your looks isn't enough. You have to completely erase your personal history too. But this guy's unique background, permanently stamped right into his flesh, was accidentally broadcasted to millions of viewers watching the security clip. The former agent called it out on national television, highlighting the marking on the intruder's arm. He explained to journalists how that specific design is going to be the ultimate game changer for clearing or charging potential suspects. Clearing and charging. That is strictly law enforcement talk, far beyond basic media chatter. The expert is pointing out a tactical tool, using the ink to sift through leads. It acts as a massive funnel, shrinking the list of possible bad guys from an entire population down to a handful of locals, and eventually straight to the actual kidnapper. During his television interview, he additionally observed that the perpetrator is most likely a guy somewhere in his 30s or 40s, judging strictly by his physical mobility and stride. The man clearly didn't carry himself like someone hitting their 50s or 60s. Instead, he fits the profile of a younger adult. And since he lacked serious criminal polish, the guy is definitely giving off massive red flags right now, acting incredibly paranoid in a way his friends would easily spot. They need to look out for weird schedule gaps, radical mood swings, or sudden makeovers. The analyst essentially painted a picture of a desperate fugitive who is slowly running out of places to hide. We need to look at the entire picture here. Seeing as law enforcement is actively tracking down the origin of every single garment on tape, making the ink just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Federal agents officially pegged the perpetrator as an average-sized guy standing roughly 5'9" to 5'10". Detectives figured out those exact numbers by running a digital scale analysis, comparing the intruder's height directly against the framing of the victim's front entrance. Moving to his gear. Teeny, a major news network pinpointed his bag as a 25-liter hiking sack from a massive big-box retailer. A cheap store brand item you can only get at their locations. This turns every single one of those stores around the greater Tucson area into a goldmine for security footage. Cops are hoping a cashier remembers ringing it up. They are looking into every rewards account used during a sale. As for the weapon setup, detectives are currently busting their humps to nail down the exact make of the pistol and its carrying case caught on film. Experts immediately flagged the strange way the gun was mounted on his hip. That kind of weird placement is actually a huge psychological clue into how he operates. Regarding his hand protection, authorities managed to find one of the dark tactical mitts dumped roughly 2 miles away from the crime scene. Lab techs ran the genetic material through the Federal Offender Registry, bouncing it against almost 27 million criminal profiles. They came up totally empty. The biological evidence scooped up from inside the residence also completely failed to trigger a system alert. This lack of data speaks volumes to the task force. It highly suggests the guy has juvenile records, got locked up overseas, or simply slipped past the federal net. Alternatively, this horrific abduction could actually be his very first strike on American soil. Finally, the recording gave up one more crucial secret that the police are trying desperately to keep quiet, though investigative reporters have already managed to sniff it out. In the pictures dropped by the FBI, it looks like the guy hit Nancy Guthrie's place on 2 different occasions. He carried a rucksack and a sidearm rig in one shot, but came empty-handed in the other. Separate dates. Identical masked guy. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a stakeout. The guy was tracking his victim. Yet during that lengthy stakeout period, a tiny sliver of his identity got caught on video. Time for a quick legal heads-up before moving forward. Nobody has officially been pointed out, caught, or indicted regarding the vanishing of Nancy Guthrie. All the following details come from identified professionals and open-source breakdowns, rather than formal police reports. We absolutely refuse to drop names or guess who exactly is involved. Our job is strictly sharing professional on-the-record statements. When Nancy Grace and her Crime Stories crew started breaking down the video, they consulted a guy with 3 solid decades of experience, decoding human canvases. Darren Rosa is his actual name. Everybody calls him the Dude. He runs Rising Dragon Tattoos right out of New York City. The guy isn't some police detective. He's a true artisan who dedicated 30 years to figuring out precisely what the location, design, and technique of body art reveal about an individual. They handed Rosa a heavily magnified screenshot pulled right from the Fed's porch camera video. Just a tiny piece. A tiny peek of body art showing right between the edge of the guy's jacket and his hand cover, specifically on the right arm joint. Using that tiny glimpse, Rosa managed to pull together several precise professional conclusions. The very first takeaway was that the artwork featured monotone shading. Within the body art community, monotone shading isn't merely about lacking color. That represents a distinct category carrying unique roots, distinct cultural ties, and regional popularity. Speaking straight to Nancy Grace, Rosa explained that monotone artwork happens to be incredibly common, particularly throughout the Southwest region, and specifically within the Southwest underworld of street crews and syndicates. Since those guys really love monotone shading, the guy then broke down exactly why those specific designs completely rule that underworld. Monotone shading. If we look closely at artwork completely inked behind bars, well, Those guys locked up just simply lack access to certain supplies. If the piece was genuinely crafted inside a cell block, according to Rosa, guys doing time simply cannot get their hands on bright pigments. That particular look has essentially decorated street crews for decades. Those artists actually perfected the method, turning incredibly smooth, shading transitions into a literal masterpiece. People actually view this stuff as a badge of honor for anyone climbing the ranks. Top-tier monotone body art goes way beyond mere looks. That acts as a literal resume. You're basically looking at a physical transcript of someone's rank in the underworld. Pulling off that level of detail and smooth shading proves serious talent, commanding massive respect in that community. The guy isn't talking about some quick parlor walk-in. He's detailing artwork that broadcasts exactly what the guy has lived through and the specific crew he stands for. Then he took things up a notch, literally pinning down the guy's location. This exact shading method holds up perfectly against intense UV rays. Rosa pointed out how these guys bake outside, down south. Places like Arizona, New Mexico, Lower California, and Texas. The expert totally linked the guy's body art background straight to Nancy Guthrie's actual home turf. You know, heavy sunlight. Well, just like I mentioned earlier, that particular aesthetic featuring delicate, one-needle precision perfectly matches the spot she vanished from. Right after that, Rosa dropped a bombshell that flipped a simple ink analysis into a massive legal nightmare for the perpetrator. If that tiny piece is all that's visible, Rosa explained to Nancy Grace, we're probably looking at a massive piece, completely wrapping the dude's whole limb. An entire blackout sleeve, meaning no tiny leg stamp or random bicep design, but heavy pigment traveling straight from the hand all the way up past the joint to the collarbone. That exact takeaway brings one huge consequence that Rosa spelled out. The guy absolutely has his knuckles blasted. He is rocking a full head covering. You know, a ski mask. There is a massive chance his throat is completely inked, or possibly his cheekbones. Since that's exactly how these crews operate. Knuckles. The guy came rocking a full face covering. A total ski mask. Odds are high. His throat is blasted. Maybe even a cheek piece. Hold up. Rewind that tape. This guy rocked a heavy ski mask, despite the heat out in Tucson, Arizona. Right at dawn on February 1st. He sported combat gloves. He kept a heavy windbreaker zipped up, snug around his head. Everyone normally assumes the guy simply wanted to cover his mug. Sure, that checks out. However, Rosa brings up a far deeper theory here. The dude wasn't merely masking his identity. He was actively concealing the artwork underneath that face shield. Throat pieces, possible cheek bangers, maybe even teardrops by the socket, plus heavily blasted knuckles tucked safely inside those combat mitts. Almost guaranteed, the guy absolutely didn't step off his porch on February 1st, blending in with the crowd. He stepped outside looking like a literal ninja. Simply because if he ditched the gear and the hand covers, literally anyone who knew him would instantly recognize the guy without a single doubt. You can easily shave off a beard. You can buzz your hair. However, an entire limb blasted with jailhouse shading covering your knuckles, biceps, and throat, or cheekbones, simply can't be tossed in the laundry, masked at the local pump, or buried beneath a ball cap. Rosa totally backed up that final breakdown. I'd bet real money we're hunting down a guy absolutely covered in ink, especially around the collarbone. Time to talk police work. The body art gives us one solid lead, though it hardly stops there. Let's map out the entire detective board, since the real magic happens right where all these different clues collide. County Sheriff Chris Nanos hopped on the NBC Today broadcast, promising his detectives are finally zeroing in on a target. He dropped that claim openly on live television, cementing their official stance on the manhunt. That isn't just basic comfort talk. That's a top cop signaling to the country that a massive internal shift happened. It means the evidence board those detectives see looks totally different than what the public knows. Enter genetics. Crime scene techs bagged genetic material directly from Nancy's house. They also pulled swabs off a dumped glove roughly 2 miles away from the lot. The feds ran both swab sets through CODIS, their massive national system holding close to 27 million genetic records from guilty felons. Coming up empty on both attempts is definitely a letdown. However, C. Moore, who leads genetic genealogy efforts over at Parabon Nanolabs, shared a straightforward message with Fox News Digital. She stated that if experts can run the genetic material through investigative genealogy protocols, pinpointing the owner becomes a waiting game. This specific forensic approach, often called IgG, is the exact strategy that finally busted Golden State Killer Joseph James DeAngelo more than 40 years later. Authorities used that exact strategy to pinpoint Bryan Kohberger as the suspect in the University of Idaho homicides. The process involves constructing an ancestral web linked to the mystery genetic signature, locating kin who willingly uploaded their genetic markers to public platforms like Ancestry or GED Match. From there, experts map the lineage in reverse until they isolate the individual whose biological material was left behind. It requires intense patience and could drag on for several months, though the available technology has advanced in leaps and bounds. Genealogy expert Barbara Rae-Venter, who assisted with the DeAngelo investigation, highlighted these upgrades by noting they now possess incredibly advanced programs for this work. Yet, the genetic evidence here presents some unique hurdles. Sheriff Nanos openly acknowledged that the genetic material recovered indoors is contaminated. It likely holds genetic markers from several individuals, causing major technical headaches for the technicians trying to untangle them. He did not sugarcoat the difficulties surrounding the collected material. Even so, he pointed out that their forensic team recognizes how rapidly these analytical methods are advancing. Experts believe these hurdles might just iron themselves out within a few weeks or months. That genetic avenue remains an open, active investigation rather than a dead end. Looking at the sequence of events, detectives are also keeping a close, relentless eye on another crucial element. They are digging into the sequence of events from the night prior to Nancy vanishing. Here are the facts so far. People last laid eyes on Nancy Guthrie on the evening of January 31st, and Sheriff Nanos completely ruled out her relatives. Savannah Guthrie, alongside her brother, her sister, and their respective partners, are entirely in the clear. The sheriff stated this without any ambiguity. However, authorities are still aggressively probing the time frame right before she vanished. Detectives want to know exactly who hung out with Nancy, who gave her a ride, and who hovered around the property. Through her deep dive for the Drop Dead broadcast on Sirius, journalist Ashleigh Banfield named Savannah Guthrie's brother-in-law, Tomaso Chioni, as the guy who chauffeured Nancy back to her place that night. Nobody has labeled Chioni a person of interest. He faces 0 indictments and was never taken into custody. We are simply repeating details already published by credible news outlets. And that is it. Here is the absolute truth. Authorities are still trying to figure out who caught the final glimpse of Nancy, who understood her daily habits, and who realized the residence was vulnerable before dawn. Tech analyst Heather Barnhart, a veteran of the Bryan Kohberger case and an expert with the SANS Institute and Qbyte, provided NBC News with an insight that perfectly fits this situation. Folks often overlook how widely their digital footprint scatters across gadgets. She explained that the exact hurdles slowing down detectives also make covering tracks incredibly difficult for perpetrators. Moreover, your mobile device acts as an invisible observer of your daily routine. It tracks your every move. The person who snatched Nancy Guthrie undoubtedly carried a smartphone. That device sat in Tucson's Catalina foothills region prior to February 1st, perhaps repeatedly if those scouting reports hold water. It likely bounced off local network masts, logged GPS coordinates, and stored buying habits, browser inquiries, and messaging logs that could directly link the suspect to the property. The crime stories with Nancy Grace broadcast verified that detectives are presently demanding records from tech giants Google and Apple concerning the disappearance. Therefore, how will federal agents utilize this ink? We need to get down to the nitty-gritty, mainly because rival news programs continually glaze over these crucial details. Police agencies across the country operate several digital catalogs and visual tracking networks dedicated exclusively to body art. The federal government's next-generation identification platform, known as NGI, houses extensive catalogs of skin ink alongside its massive collection of thumbprints and biometric face scans. Anytime a suspect gets processed and cops snap pictures of their exposed ink, Those images get uploaded straight into the database, run by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. The National Gang Center archives underworld body art and symbols. They track the exact patterns tied to identified illicit syndicates, where members place them, what the images represent, and where they pop up most often. Furthermore, places like Arizona, Texas, California, and New Mexico run their independent underworld tracking grids. Those localized networks constantly share intelligence with national servers. Detectives can easily scan them and compare notes across different platforms. This is exactly how detectives run a body art search in the real world. Rosa flagged the aesthetic as a monochromatic grayscale design. He pinned down the regional origin to the American Southwest, noting heavy cartel and syndicate ties. He also estimated the sheer scale, suggesting an entire arm piece extending up to the throat and visage. Every single one of these details acts as a sorting mechanism when detectives scan the massive network. The monochromatic shading limits the artistic classification. The Southwest Syndicate and narco ties slice down the pool of potential group affiliations. Focusing on an entire arm piece shrinks the suspect pool even further. If the artwork actually features distinct graphics or symbols matching a recognized underworld crew, the results plummet from millions to thousands, dropping to hundreds, and possibly landing on one exact name attached to a single police file. Ex-federal investigator Jonathan Gilliam popped up on the Megyn Kelly broadcast back on March 18th, a mere 24 hours prior to this clip dropping, and broke down the tactical side of things point blank. He showed a healthy dose of doubt regarding certain conclusions, pointing out that countless Arizonans rock full arm pieces. He is absolutely correct that a mere glimpse of ink cannot guarantee a positive ID. However, Gilliam followed up by explaining that even a tiny feature matters because once an inked individual gets handcuffed, their artwork goes straight into the system. Therefore, a registry might already hold that specific trait, leaving detectives to simply piece the puzzle together. Piecing the puzzle together is precisely the current objective. Authorities are chasing down one more massive clue here, and the big cable networks have barely mentioned a word about it. Nancy Grace actually shined a spotlight on this detail during her latest podcast episodes. Someone defaced an electrical cabinet right by Nancy Guthrie's property, prompting authorities to haul in street art experts and ink specialists to analyze the markings. The overlap between underground street tagging and body art scenes is absolutely not just a random fluke. When dealing with organized crime syndicates, you will find identical symbols painted across urban brick as those inked into their flesh. That distinct artistic style, spotted on the perpetrator's forearm by Rosa, frequently shows up in street tagging to claim neighborhoods and signal crew loyalty. Graffiti experts undergo rigorous training to decipher those seemingly meaningless scribbles, uncovering syndicate hierarchies and turf boundaries that everyday people just write off as mindless property damage. Detectives recruited subject matter experts who specialize in interpreting underworld symbols and body art. Making this calculated move by law enforcement perfectly matches up with the ink analysis provided earlier by Darren Rosa. We are not looking at two separate tracks here. Both paths are colliding into one single focal point. Which crew is involved? And how does that impact Nancy Guthrie's current whereabouts? It is time to circle back to the present reality of this manhunt. Genetic material processing through ancestry databases, tracking down where the garments and knapsack were sold, studying the suspect's walking pattern on video, tech warrants sent out to Apple and Google, cross-checking ink records through national and local crime syndicate networks, while graffiti decoders analyze the property damage right around Nancy's residence. C.C. Moore serves as the lead DNA ancestry expert over at Parabon Nanolabs, a company credited with tackling thousands of unsolved mysteries. In an interview with Fox News Digital, she delivered a message that needs to be taken as an absolute scientific guarantee rather than mere wishful thinking. Because of how advanced forensic ancestry tracking has become, figuring out the true identity behind that biological evidence is simply a waiting game. That gives law enforcement the green light to chase down those fresh clues and ideally bring some closure to Nancy's loved ones. A guaranteed countdown, rather than a conditional maybe or crossed fingers. It is a stone-cold fact of modern detective work. As long as the biological sample is adequate, ancestry tracking never misses. The process merely stretches out if the family tree links happen to be far removed. Scientific breakthroughs are outpacing any criminal's ability to hide. Plus, we have to factor in the massive financial incentive. The FBI has put up a $100,000 bounty for any tips that uncover Nancy Guthrie's whereabouts or put her kidnappers behind bars. Nancy's relatives are putting up a private $1 million bounty. A cool $1 million just for dialing a hotline. Allegiance has its limits, and keeping quiet comes with a heavy cost. Furthermore, the underground network, this perpetrator undoubtedly rolls with the exact same crowd. Rosa linked him to, operates strictly on a delicate system of mutual reliance. $1 million easily shatters those street bonds for the vast majority of individuals. Now, let us circle back to the very beginning. The intruder masked his features, concealed his head, wore gloves, and bundled up. This was premeditated. He mapped out the property, returned to the scene, and had the surveillance blind spots memorized, stretching his arm out in the dead of night. He blacked out the security feed. He calculated every single identifying physical trait that might expose him, completely forgetting a tiny sliver. That tiny patch of skin is currently sitting in national crime systems. An ink professional with 30 years under his belt scrutinized it, pinpointing the exact artistic genre, underground subculture, and geographic region it hails from. One of the most seasoned former federal behavior analysts working in broadcasting today has already shined a massive spotlight on it. Authorities are actively matching it up against syndicate ink catalogs and old booking sheets. They are also lining it up next to the graffiti discovered on that electrical box, right by Nancy's residence. At this very moment, a person who knows exactly what that design means is looking at it. That is consistently the way these mysteries unravel. It never happens through some cinematic lightbulb moment. It rarely comes from breaking a suspect down inside a bleak interrogation chamber. The final curtain drops when the heat gets to an associate, someone in the perpetrator's inner orbit who has seen his bare face and bare hands, and they finally figure out that keeping their mouth shut is a losing bet. 47 days in, the ink holds no more secrets. The biological evidence is weaving its way through ancestry algorithms, and investigators are hunting down the origin of his gear. The culprit is still roaming free. He has likely altered his physical look somewhere locally by this point, constantly glancing back in pure paranoia whenever he steps outside. Each passing sunrise presents a fresh chance for an informant with the right details to finally throw in the towel on protecting this guy's skin. The idiot flashed his ink on video. Now it belongs to the feds, the national systems, the analysts, and the everyday citizens, and that might be the nail in his coffin. Anybody holding on to clues regarding the vanishing of Nancy Guthrie needs to dial 1-800-CALL-FBI immediately. That line is 1-800-225-5324. You could likewise drop your leads onto the web at tips.fbi.gov or reach out to the Puma County Sheriff's deputies straight away. You can reach their station at 520-351-490. The federal authorities are putting up a $100,000 bounty, while the Guthrie relatives are matching that with a cool $1 million. Let us get her back safely. The Inked Truth. A lesson in justice on a quiet February morning in 2026. The silence of a home was shattered when Nancy Guthrie was taken from the safety of her own porch. The intruder arrived like a calculated shadow, draped in specialized tactical gear and a mask designed to erase every human feature. He deliberately killed the security feed, believing he could vanish into the night without leaving a single thread for justice to pull. But evil is rarely as flawless as it imagines. In his arrogance, the perpetrator forgot that the truth has a way of surfacing. A tiny sliver of skin, a permanent physical transcript of his past, etched in ink, flashed before a hidden lens, turning a carefully planned abduction into a countdown for his capture. Today, the waiting game is nearly over. From advanced genetic genealogy to the digital footprints we all leave behind, science is weaving a net that no mask can penetrate. This case serves as a powerful reminder. No matter how deep the shadow, the light of community and the persistence of law always find a way through. With a combined $1 million bounty on the line, the bonds of criminals' silence are fraying. Stand with Nancy's family and be the voice she lost. If you know something, dial 1-800-CALL LFBI. Let's bring her home.